Hello and welcome to Lakeside Drive. The fifth Australian to win a Formula One Grand Prix goes by the name of Oscar Piastri. But it wouldn't be McLaren if they didn't give us something to talk about along the way. Between dizzying drones, unbelievable undercuts and volatile Verstappen, it's going to be a juicy episode as we discuss the Hungarian Grand Prix. To join me in doing this, Thomas J. Camp. How are you, Sir Beanie?
I'm very well, my friend. How are you? Hello, listener. How you going? Jeez, what a great weekend. I'm just stoked that I'm stoked there is another Aussie driver that joins that long list of Jones, Brabham, Webber, Ricciardo, and now Piastri. And it's great for us as fans. We've not had a lot of success here for the Aussies while we've done this podcast. I think we had one win in 2019, but it's been few and far between, so I'm celebrating the wins. Does it have a question mark? Maybe we'll discuss that later, but yeah, geez, I thought he was on last week and just had that feeling that things might go his way this weekend, and it was great. It was good. Very excited for his future.
Very excited for the future indeed. Like you said, fantastic for us Aussies who have been waiting for this moment. He's been threatening to win for multiple weekends now and did finally get it done. Let's talk a little bit about the weekend in general. Only one bit of real news that kind of came out over the last couple of weeks, and that is confirming what most of us probably suspected, which is that K-Mag will not be racing with HAAS after this season. Campy, it didn't seem like a shock. Like that didn't come as too much of a surprise to me. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, spot on. I wasn't shocked. I didn't think he would. The only reason I thought he would stay is if HAAS wanted some continuity in their drivers for next year. They've clearly gone another way. Hulk's leaving, he's leaving. So I didn't think he'd be valuable enough to go somewhere else when some of the other drivers that are out there. But he'd be wrapped. He left Formula One. You've got to remember, this guy raced his first race for McLaren in Melbourne when Alonso was hurt, I think, and got a podium on debut. So the guy's quick, showed a lot of potential. Lost out his seat in the sport because, HAAS went in one direction with two very young drivers. Realised that was a mistake. And like Hulk, got a re-gift on his career for another 2 years. So it was good for him. But moving on, I'm not surprised. But he'd be spewing, no doubt. But I'm damn sure he'll have a career out in the wide world of motorsport for a long time. Moving forward, he'll probably head back to the States and go the NASCAR route, I think. So,
yeah, well, that's it. So before this news actually came out, that we were starting to get some hints that this was going to be the case. And the way that he was talking about what he sees out there, like you said, in the great wide world of motorsport, he said, I look to drivers in other series, IndyCar and the like, and say, they look pretty happy. So maybe I'll go and see what that's about. So I think he was already looking to see what other opportunities might be out there for him. The other thing is that this is a guy with a young family and with a lot of meaning and purpose outside of motorsport as well. So as much as I'm sure he'd love to continue to drive, and I remember that beautiful smile that was on his face, which he could not wipe when he came back into Formula One in the way that you've just described. He was stoked about it. He was absolutely stoked. This was not on his bingo card, and he was thrilled to be back. Yeah. And so, like you said, I think this has almost been like a bonus couple of seasons for him that he didn't see coming. And so that's just been the kind of cherry on top of his career, and he's not going to he's not somebody who I worry about when it comes to retirement, in terms of, his fulfillment and whatever else he chooses to get up to. So my favourite part of this, though, really was actually the fact that when he announced it on his Instagram, he signed off, "Kind regards, Kevin Magnussen."
It's the nicest sign off I think he's ever given, ever. Very good. I don't even put kind.
Some people have pointed out the opportunity that Stake have to see Hulkenberg and K-Mag racing alongside each other again, which would be very intriguing. But not sure that's going to be what we will see, unfortunately. And the rumours about the seat that is available now at Haas is that it could be one Frenchman that we see going to the American team. But we will only discuss that when it is confirmed, because that's how we like to do things here. Campy, did you have any general comments about the race weekend in terms of the broadcast, the direction, otherwise known as a segment called Tommy T's Broadcast Review? But we're just going to go in the general comments direction.
General comments. Look, it's Formula One. It's awesome. I had the house to myself this weekend, which was great. So I watched a lot of it. I liked it. The anthem was excellent. Excellent voice, bit less operatic than what we saw with God Save the King the other week. That was probably the sweet spot for me. And we had a cello, a couple of harps, which was good to see. I think we had a clarinet and some, I think it was one violin in there. So I don't know what you call that. It's a quintet maybe. It was excellent. Very well enjoyed it. Weekend was great. I like this track. This track has produced some really good races over the years. DRS is not a big factor like it will be next weekend in Spa down after Eau Rouge and down the straight. I think it's the Kemmel Straight, just off memory. Look, two very different races from what we saw this weekend to next weekend. But I do like this track. It's got it just seems to be it just produces good racing all the time. So really enjoyed it.
I agree with everything you just said, and my only comment is please don't make drones happen. They're not going to happen. Maybe it was a combination of 2 days in Vegas and then watching the race curled up on the couch on Monday afternoon, but they make me dizzy, and it's not adding to the value of the spectator experience when it comes to those drones. It's just it doesn't work. I kind of find myself looking like a confused puppy, kind of turning my head trying to figure out where it's going. So no drones in Formula One. We don't need it, not to follow the race anyway. Let's get into our Discord comment of the week. Campy, what have you got for me? I never quite know what to expect.
Look, I can't remember who it was, and the phrasing of it was, Joe Biden has stepped down, as did Oscar Piastri. All that's left is Sergio Perez. So I just saw that and I thought, come on, it's just what I want to hear. So very good, very good.
Well, I thought you were going to steal mine for a minute there, because mine is along a similar vein. So mine comes from Where to Find Mel, who said Norris and Biden did the right thing eventually, but both a little too late. And I completely agree with you there, Mel. I also wanted to give a shout out to Hulk on the grid walk. This is going to be my Discord comment of the week if nothing jumped out at me. But Brundle said, "Have a good race," to Hulkenberg, who replied, "Yeah, you too." Which is like when the waiter brings you lunch and they say, "Enjoy your lunch," and you're like, "Yeah, you too. Thanks."
Good. Thanks for clarifying that for us.
We love these little moments.
Freya
all
clarifying
right.
things.
Before we get into our team-by-team analysis, there is a segment here which might become a regular thing we'll see, which is about Lakeside Drive fashion. We have an incredible piece of apparel for you to go and check out, listener. It is in collaboration with Lockdown. You might have seen their collaborations before with the likes of Molly Taylor, Hunter McElra, Elbamba Motorsports. They've got some incredible merch out there. We have a beautiful, beautiful blue Campy. You might even want to think about replacing that beanie when you see this thing. Snapback, which is waterproof. It's been designed by James and myself, if you don't mind. So if this fails, we might go into some casual fashion design after this. I don't know. It could be our third calling when it comes to our careers. But that is now available for purchase. So head down to lockdownbrand.com to secure yours. It is a limited run for the time being. Their stuff is so good. I don't think James has taken his Molly Taylor hat off for about 6 months or however long he's owned it for, basically. And that's because it is a genuinely comfortable and practical hat, as well as looking absolutely superb. So make sure you head over and take a look at that one. And while you're at it, do you know we also have merch on our website? We do. So head along to lakesidedrive.com and you will find that as well. Team by team analysis. Let's do it. Starting at the back, Alpine. So we are going to talk about them, even though there's probably not much to say. But they were the two slowest cars in qualifying, which is actually the first time they have been the two slowest cars in qualifying since our first race in Bahrain. Gasly just completely defeated in his post-race interview, which you completely understand. It's had DNF, so he qualified 20th and then DNF this weekend. He thinks they think it was a hydraulics issue, but like he kind of said, this week's it's hydraulics. Last week it was strategy. Week before that it was something else. He obviously had a DNF before that. Ocon qualified 19th, finished 18th, and just said, "Look, we need to do better." My question here, Campy, because I don't think there's much to talk about when it comes to these two particular drivers in this weekend. When it comes to Alpine, my question for you is, what do you do if you are Jack Doohan's manager and there is a seat open at Alpine and you're trying to get him in it, or are you?
Yeah, you're trying to get him in it because the reality is Jack wants to be racing, he needs to be on the grid. So the only chance for him to get on the grid and the only team that has shown any real promise has been Alpine. He's in the junior driver program. He's been given a lot of FP1s this year, albeit most of them been in the wet and in conditions where he can't really show what he's trying to do. You've got to get him into the sport. Will Alpine take they've got to take him. They can't not take him. Now that Ocon has moved on and there's a seat spare, there is no point in them waiting around for a better driver. Worst case scenario, look, they've got to take him, and that is Jack Doohan's road. To be fair to Gasly and Ocon, they weren't too bad in quali. They were sitting 12th and 13th, and then the conditions changed on the track, and it started to dry out. And look, why they left the cars in the garage and did not bring them out for that second half of Q1 ultimately put them where they did, and it is a shame for them because they looked better than what the results said. Race pace is a different story, but to give them some credit, they didn't look as bad as what the end result was. But they are French, and we saw lots of teams make some very, very strategic, stupid decisions this weekend. So it's not surprising that Alpine's one of them, and Ferrari's not for a change. So good on them, but they were nowhere, so it didn't matter anyway.
They're very fair comments, I would say, Campy. Next week we have Sauber / Stake / Kick. Never been clear on what's going on with their name, but obviously with Bottas and Joe. So Bottas qualified 12th, finished 16th. Joe 18th and finished 19th. Not a huge amount to say when it comes to the race that these guys had. They were kind of in no man's land. There was some potential with Bottas early on, but he said, look, as much as we might have qualified on the cusp of the top 10, we just don't have the race pace to be considering points, really. I think he has got quite a realistic understanding as to who their competition is with, who they're actually racing against. And as much as he'd love to say that, they're in points contention when you qualify in a position like 12th, knew pretty quickly that was not on for them this weekend. Let's jump to HAAS, I think, with Hülkenberg and Magnussen, who we've just been discussing about. Magnussen qualified 15th, finished 15th. He made a bunch of places up off the start, but ultimately ended up back where he started. Hülkenberg qualified 11th, finished 13th. Campy, any reflections for them for the Hungarian race?
HAAS would have been frustrated because their main competitor this year is the V-Carb, and for them to not beat V-Carb on track would be frustrating for them. I think they've probably had better race pace throughout the year if you looked over the whole the whole thing. But what's got them over the line is that one lap pace in qualifying. So on these weekends where VCARB qualifies in front of them, they need to get the start so they can get in front of them. The problem is on a track like this, their race pace lacked so badly that I think on Danny Rick's second pit stop or whatever, on his second pit stop, he pitted and he was behind all of those guys. And once they reshuffled, Danny Rick was about 4 seconds in front of Hulk. By the end of the race, it was out to 18. So that tells me that last stint that the VCARB was very good over a race pace. So they'd be frustrated because that's their main competitor, and if they don't get them in qualifying and they're right behind them, they need to get them off the start and then build that in a race. And they did everything right, but the car just lacked general performance this weekend. So shame for them, but we got another half a season to go, really, for them to show us what they can do.
It is an interesting one, like you said, with 11 races left to see where those two do start to sit after the race pace. Because like you said, I think they've very much established themselves as solid qualifiers. But what we need to see there is then the strategy and their race pace kind of match their potential when it comes to the positions that they manage to get themselves in on the Saturday. So that will be very interesting to see how they progress from that perspective of the race weekend. Williams up next. We had Sargent qualified 14th, finished 17th. Albon finished 14th after qualifying in 13th. Albon had an interesting race. He was quite critical of the team when it came to their decisiveness around their pit strategy. They went from a 2-stop to a 3-stop, but then having said we're doing a 3-stop, they went back to a 2-stop. Of course, by which point Alex has killed his tyres. They tried to undercut Fernando. That didn't work. And so I think they did kind of suffer from some of their own decision-making when it came to trying to get the most out of Albon's race in particular. Campy, did you have any thoughts on what we saw from the pit lane for Albon's race?
Look, again, you were spot on when Albon's cooked his tyres and they asked him to extend. There's just that ruins races. Look, they don't have the raw pace. To their credit, they qualified relatively well in their positions they should be. As for Sargent, I'll talk about Sargent's weekend. Sargent qualified right behind Albon, and the gap wasn't that big. That was a good qualifying session for him.
Yeah.
Throughout the race, the reason he slipped back is because he had a Mercedes in George Russell and a Perez behind him as well. So there where you lose a couple of positions, and with the poor strategy in that car, that's where he lost his positions. Albon is a quicker driver, and we know that. And he's able to do a bit more and extract more pace over the long distance. Albon probably had a frustrating weekend just because he wants more from the car. He wants more performance. Yep. He wants better tyre wear. He wants a faster engine. He wants more downforce when he can have it, or less downforce. Just not clicking at the team. They will get results this year, and they'll get drip fed some points over the remainder of the 11 races. But frustrating, and he's a long-term commitment to that team, so he really has to take it on his shoulders and do what he's done, because he's another driver that had a top drive in this sport. Was it too early? Yep. Absolutely. Did it jeopardise his career? Yeah, I think it did up until this point. Has he learnt a lot? Absolutely. Is he set for the next couple of years to prove himself so that hopefully he gets another chance in one of those top teams? Yeah, but I just think there's a lot of other drivers that you would take a risk on before you'd take a risk on Albon. Although seemingly he's well respected in the paddock and he's got a good reputation with everybody. And he's a nice guy. And we here at Lakeside Drive, we champion the nice guys, don't we, for us? They bring a smile to our faces when we talk about them. So.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I think, like you said, his career has been an interesting one. And I think he's now starting to get some traction again when it comes to having a name out there that is a potential safe set of hands with some great potential that we're not seeing the entirety of in his current team, but that experience and then the consequential kind of time out that he had after that Red Bull experience has has changed his career trajectory. Oh my gosh, I'm not even going to try and say that word again. In a really dramatic way. And like you said, I think he's got a couple of years at Williams, maybe to see if he can get that opportunity again. I'm not sure it's going to happen, like you said, because those drivers who we say, yeah, maybe after a while, just they become superseded by the next generation, which is probably what's going to happen in his case by the likes of Ollie Behrman. There's going to be far more exciting prospect after you give him a couple of years at HAAS to put him in a top team potentially, rather than somebody who's been around for a while, who is still, relatively unknown in a certain way, because we've only seen him actually, and with that one opportunity which didn't go so well. Let's move on to RB. Now, Campy, I have a question for you. If you start on mediums, why do you pit on lap 8?
Oh, my God. Look, I got up and threw a teddy bear that was my dog's at the TV when that happened. What? Now, my biggest bone of contention with Danny Rick this year has been his starts. And this year he's lost way too many positions on starts. Now, I think that's got something to do with the car warming up the tyres and being able to get them in a place where he can, carry the speeds that he needs, the operating temperature of them. So they struggle on that. So I understand when you start on a medium and your three main competitors behind you start on a soft, that they have the possibility of jumping you, like we've seen 7 or 8 times this year. That doesn't bother me, because Danny Rick's pace over a race, particularly in the last, 6 races, where he's beaten Yuki 4 out of the last 6 races, and I think he's got the upper hand on that rivalry at the moment. In saying that, why on earth would your team pit them after the softs have just pitted that we knew were only going to last 12 laps anyway? They did that. We know the undercut's powerful, so they were already going to pass him anyway. So it was a no-brainer to keep him out and keep him on the strategy that Yuki was played. You look at the gap that Yuki had to the rest of those guys by the end of the race doing the one-stop. It just says I'm trying to rationalise it in my head. I don't think there's a conspiracy that they're trying to stuff Danny Rick over. I think they have systems in place at this team, and somebody panicked last minute and said, yep, it's the right call. Made the call when it was reality. It was probably a 70-30% wrong call, and they've nailed it and said, all right, box. So Danny got a late call. At that point, you're trusting your processes, you're trusting your engineers, and you're trusting the team. Danny knew it was wrong, but at some level, you've got to trust your process and the organisation they're in. So very frustrating, because I think Danny would have scored points. He would have got that 9th. V-Carb probably would have got that 10th positions too. And, Yuki came 10th or 9th in the end. Can't remember. Anyway, frustrating. They may have had double points, and just annoying at this stage of the year. Danny Rick doesn't need weekends like this.
No, it's like you said, it made no sense. And even when you do try and justify it or rationalize it, there's no more sense to be found. And as you said, Daniel had to do what the team had told him to when it came to coming in, because he got that call very late. So he got the call late to pit, and he said you don't have a choice in that moment. If you stay out in that scenario, it's actually dangerous, because you don't necessarily know why, and it's too late. He's like, got the call really late to come in. But then I realised, no, we're just pitting, and everyone in front of me who's coming in is on softs. This is a perfect opportunity to stay out, see what I can do in clear air and actually get track position. And then you've got Yuki, who did, 29, 30 laps on those mediums and finished in 9th at the end of it. And he said, it was only that split second between actually crossing the pit lane entry and seeing what was happening that I immediately knew it was the wrong thing to do. But because the call was so late, I didn't have time to question that with the team, which is obviously something you don't want to do very often anyway. But it only took him a second to say, what are we doing here? This would have been the perfect opportunity to stay out. The other thing here, when it came to his strategy, as much as RB came out and said, we got it wrong with Daniel this weekend. I was hoping for a much stronger statement from them so that there was no question as to Daniel's result this weekend being down to his performance, because as he said, once he came back out, you're then stuck in a DRS train, and that car does not have the pace, especially at a track like this, to try and to make moves on those cars in front of him. But all of this seemed to happen because they thought that K-Mag was the target and they were responding to K-Mag pitting. But K-Mag started on softs. So he was already obviously on a very different strategy, and the whole thing made absolutely no sense to me. Like you said, Yuki had a better run because they let him do about 30 laps on those mediums. He then pitted. He was trying to avoid getting undercut by Russell, who was somebody else who was running quite long in that first stint. But he was the only one to actually make that one stop work really when it came to this race.
And I think that strategy, whilst we know in hindsight we're looking at it, best strategy probably of the day, the reality is I don't think that strategy looked like it was really going to work ever. But the way the race played out and the way the field battled behind Yuki, and particularly in his competitors, that's what made that strategy work. So at that stage, the other teams weren't worried about what Yuki was going to do. They're like, oh, well, he's probably gone, so let's fight like hell. And, we're not really fighting the Aston Martins. We're fighting everyone else around us. So let's fight everybody else around us and keep Danny Rick behind us, and hopefully that'll change it up. I mean, Danny Rick pitted for his second stop before Yuki came in on the mediums. And that was because he was stuck in that DRS train and they had to do something. So, look, frustrating. Can we talk about Danny Rick and RB? Because we'll do it now because we're talking about him.
Go for it.
Perez is genuinely under some pressure. I listened to a podcast this week that I think it was The Race, actually. Jim doesn't work there anymore, so we no longer have all the intel from all the cool people around the grid because we're not on it. But,
cool is debatable, but continue.
Cool is debatable, but the suggestion was that at the mid-season break, if Perez was 100 points behind Verstappen, that was the clause that they could trigger within the contract. So I'm not sure where the points sit, but regardless, Perez has been utterly hopeless for the last 6 races. I mean, he's scored 16 points in that car in the last 6 races. That is mind-bogglingly poor for a team that is leading both drivers and the Constructors' Championship at the moment, and it's seemingly falling away. If Red Bull want to win that Constructors' Championship this year, they're going to have to make a move, and I think Spa's going to be interesting for Checo. If he doesn't get into at least Q3 start, I don't know, he's got to start top 5 and then get a podium to secure his, for the rest of the year, in my opinion. And I think this next track will actually suit Red Bull, so they should be up there. But look, he's in trouble. The only logical person for me is give Danny Rick half the year, and at least he got back to the top team. If they want to sign him for next year, great for us viewers. At least Danny Rick got back to the top team and had half a year there to prove himself, and at least he can close the chapter perfectly on his F1 career and hopefully help the team. Now, the only other thing that I think we're not factoring in is that Red Bull might not care about the constructors. It might be all max focused the whole time, because the constructors, whilst they win more money, they're not an organisation that relies on it.
Yep.
And, we already know about how much less time they can use in wind tunnels and developments this year. When you back on 4 championships in a row, that wind time development testing starts to double down, to back you in, so that they got half the time that, some of these, in the wind tunnel that some of their competitors do is not good. And I think that's probably why we've seen a bit of drop-off in their performance. So, who knows? That's the only one point I'd throw in there, but it's logical sense for me to change Danny Rick and Perez for the end of the year, because we know RB does not want Yuki Tsunoda. They've made that decision. It's been their decision for a very long time. He's really only performed well in, this year and then the back end of last year, where he's probably the first time in his career solidified and justified his seat in the car. The 3 years previous was just, he's there because Honda wants him.
Well, he said himself when he got his last contract extension that he was surprised he got it because he was crashing so frequently and underperforming so significantly that he was surprised himself when he got his contract extension. So you're completely right there that he has earned his next extension with RB for sure. I wouldn't argue against that because I think that the evidence is there and he has quite dramatically improved when you think about those statements. When he was saying himself, I was surprised that my contract was extended, we can see the extent to which he has improved. Just to answer that question around the championship points, so Sergio Perez currently on 124, Max Verstappen on 265. So well and truly having extended that that gap in drivers. But from a constructor's perspective, Red Bull are on 389, McLaren are on 338. So that is something that when you look at that gap, sure, it looks substantial. It's actually not, especially when you're considering where both drivers are consistently placing for McLaren and what's going on at Red Bull when you've only got one person really who's competing for the entire Constructors' Championships for the team. And like you said, it does bring into question the extent to which Red Bull are focusing on that or care. And when they have had so much instability in the team and question marks around the team and rumours and problems and everything else in the first half of the year, the only reason that I would say that they can continue on with him is just to settle everything down and say there's been so much unrest for the first half of the season that we just don't want to bring in any changes because our concentration is going to be on stability and trying to work with what we've got until we move into next year. I think the problem is that when you go into next year, what do you think is going to change then? We've got nothing to suggest that Perez is going to improve. He's followed a very similar trajectory to, I got it right, to last year when it comes to his performance over the course of the season. So I think that's, and that's obviously the big question mark. We're not the only ones asking that question of why on earth they secured his contract so early. And most of the arguments that make any sense to me are just purely around the revenue when it comes to, in particular, the Americas and what the influence that Perez sponsorship has for the team there. They are a marketing brand at the end of the day, and that is going to be really important to them. Like that is it's substantial, the impact that he has over on this side of the world. So that's the most logical argument to me when it comes to why they've kept him on board. But if, like you said, if they've got any interest in having two drivers competing every race, especially this weekend. So let's talk about the race this weekend when it comes to Red Bull. This would have been the perfect weekend for Perez to step up. You've got Max qualified third, finished fifth. Perez, though, qualified 16th, finished seventh. He went backwards off the start, and it was one of those things where there's a lot of people saying now, he had a great race. Look, I'm sorry. Sure, you finished in the points, but you had to come from 16th to get there. And when you've got Max, who's really struggling with his car, if we believe even a portion of what he was saying on his radio over the course of the weekend, then this is your opportunity to step up. And that's the thing that we talk about so often with the second driver, if you want to call it that, but two drivers, is that if you are the lesser performing driver, you have to be there when the other one is having issues or they DNF or they fail or something goes on there. You have to be there to get to maximize the points for the team. And this was that weekend for him. And in my view, he didn't do it.
Yeah, I think he's spot on. Look, I think, Russell won a race this year because, Max and Norris had a crash. He was there to pick up the pieces, albeit, he was 10, 15, 12 seconds behind. He was close enough to do it. If you are Sergio Perez in that car and what it is capable of, you have You are the person that has to be right there. I don't care if you qualify half a second behind him. That'll still generally, over the last 18 months, and it's changing because the guard is changing, that'll still generally put you in the top 5 with a car that is capable of overtaking with a DRS system that blows people away, on the right track. And he should be there to pick up those pieces, and he hasn't done it. To think back in Miami, they were 6 races in, and he was 33 points behind Max Verstappen. After Melbourne, he probably should have consolidated a bit more too, but we can forgive him that. I mean, that's exactly where you want Perez to be. But since then, 16 points, disgusting. I mean, going back to the Red Bull ring, like Max crashed, probably lost 30 seconds on track, managed to pit, and still beat his teammate. Astonishingly poor, and I'm shocked to think. I just don't understand why he's still in the team, let alone, where does he go? He goes back to the junior team, but they've got Liam Lawson that's chomping at the bit for a spot. So, look, I don't think Perez will be out of the sport, but he should be out of that seat if I was making the calls. And Red Bull, they are struggling. They are on a free fall. We know Newey stepped away. And there was an announcement about Newey because we all thought he was going to go to Ferrari. But Ferrari's come out and said, no, we're not paying him what he wants, and we don't think it will fit with the ideology and the structure of our team. Well, your team hasn't won a world championship in how long? Since Kimi Räikkönen in 2007 or 8 or whatever it was. So your structure's wrong. I know Fred Vasseur's on the right track and he's doing a lot of things, but Ferrari's the biggest team in this sport, and also the biggest political opinion. So they've got to make it. So does Red Bull try and get him back? I think he's probably done. The only place he'll really go now is Aston, but why would you go back to Aston? Well, I don't think you'd want to start there. Anyway, moving on. There are lots of things going on, and I'd love to be a fly on that wall in the organisation and fully understand it, but we don't, and we can only speculate.
There's one other thing I wanted to say about Red Bull before we move on, just with regards to Max's race. So, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for giving us those incredible scenes of 3 wide around turn 1. That was absolutely stunning. So thank you for that, to that Max in particular. Undercut twice by Lewis Hamilton. It was so interesting here because Red Bull's strategy was not spot on, as Max very much was vocal about. And I think what was interesting is that what we've been used to seeing with Red Bull is that they get every component right when another team gets one of those components wrong. So they get their pits, they nail their pit stops, they get their strategy spot on, they've got the car and they've got the driver. This weekend was, okay, their pit stops were fine, but they didn't have the car and they didn't have the strategy, so you're left with the driver. And as Max articulated, you've given me a piece of shit, I'm trying to rescue my own race. So it's just interesting because that is all, like you said, very different to what we've been used to seeing from Red Bull in the past. Even at the start of this season, it looked like we were going to have another dominant Red Bull takeover for this season. But, yeah, it was just very interesting. Obviously, he had that incident with Hamilton. We haven't heard anything about, as far as I'm aware, about any penalties yet. If it hasn't come out yet to me, it's too late. You can't be saying something about it now.
I've got one more thing to say on it. Max. Okay, one more thing to say about Max. But he shouldn't.
Not finished yet.
Sorry. Keep going. I'll just put my hand up to say, throw to me. We need to work on our non-verbal communication skills. Sorry if you're out there. I thought you were saying,
when I said there's no news about a penalty yet, I thought you were saying, no, there is. So there's one other thing I wanted to say, though. Obviously, he had that incident with Hamilton, took way too much pace into that corner, couldn't hold it. So I want to talk about Max's behaviour because I'm going to talk about somebody else's behaviour later. There is an extent to which we accept drivers for who they are, as we should, because we're all different and we have our own personality quirks, and Max is the most single-minded person in the world, I think, when it comes to racing.
Yep.
However, whilst I'm all for direct and clear communication and he has a certain relationship with him and his engineer, and that's not necessarily for us to talk about. They've worked together for like 8 years. They're good. I'm not concerned about how he speaks, quite honestly, to his racing engineer, to GP. They have a dynamic. They're cool with it. What I think we mistake sometimes when it comes to how drivers talk on the radio is that we do think about it as a conversation between them and their engineer, potentially sometimes them and their team principal. But what they are talking about is often an entire organisation. If I was a Red Bull employee and I heard the way Max was talking about the team and what he was provided with on the weekend, I would be so incredibly dejected and pissed off, because it is not just about the strategy. It was about everything, and it came across as a real attack on the team. If I was a Red Bull employee, I'd be so pissed off right now because of the way Max spoke about the team. And I don't think that was acceptable. Yes, he's a direct person. Yes, he's Dutch. I'm Dutch. I get it. Like, I really, really do. Yep. But that crossed a line for me from being blunt and direct and clear and plus an element of personality to actually being downright disrespectful and rude. And I love you, Max, but not on. I think you need to have more respect for not just your engineer in terms of who you're talking to. Like I said, that's a bit of a unique situation. You've got to remember who you're talking about, and that wasn't on for me. Campy, I'm going to throw to you now.
Look, I hear where you're coming from. I don't mind it. I don't mind saying this from Max, because Max drives like this. He's always driving on the edge. Even when he's winning, he's driving on the edge. That move up that he made up at Hamilton, that is nothing that we haven't seen from Max other than the last 3 years, because he's been so dominant. So I don't expect him to change his driving style. He's clearly frustrated because, what you said before, Red Bull nailed these things. If we had been on a Silverstone or a Spa next weekend or somewhere in the Middle East, that strategy to have fresher tyres in order to pass people would have worked everywhere else. This track, it didn't. Just because of the nature of it. The straight's not long enough. The DRS is not OP like we've seen before. Now, the fact that I think Max's frustration came from the fact that not once, but on the 2 pit stops, they decided to go longer in order to relish positions to the cars behind them. It just didn't work. Now, the only other thing I'll say, I don't think Max should have had to give that position to Lando off the start. There was no room, and Lando clearly pushed him wide. The only thing that Max could have milked it a bit more and taken it a bit tighter, but 3 doesn't go into 2, and there was no... Max was always coming off. I think it made it worse because he just went wider. But I'll leave it there because probably need to move on to another team. But I think Max may have been able to defend. I'm going to disagree with you hard on
that one, but yep.
Oh, really? Really? I think Max was able to defend Norris behind him throughout the race, but soon as you had to give him inside.
Like if Norris hadn't pushed further out, we would have had Oscar probably crash on the inside or have to drop back. I think Norris was making sure he left Oscar room, and sure, he did move out, but also Max had committed to that outside line and he couldn't stick it. Like, Norris didn't push him off the track. He was leaving Oscar space, and maybe Max couldn't see where Oscar was. But
So I don't. This is the start. This is when things happen. If you look at every start in the history of this race, someone always goes wide because they're forced off track. Now, do I think?
Yeah, but it's
Max would have Max, in my views, technically, although he's on the outside, probably still had the line because at the apex of it, he was probably in front of him. If it wasn't for Oscar coming up the inside and pushing Lando wide, then we wouldn't have had the issue. But the reality is that every start of this race has one driver doing the same thing, and why aren't they penalised? Yeah. So that's why it's a driving incident. The thing that cooked it for him is because he committed to it early. because he's like, as soon as he knew he wasn't going to make the corner, he got on the gas way earlier than what he normally would have and went way too wide. If he had have driven a bit tighter, he might have got away with it and driven on the curb a bit more. But yeah, I don't think he should have done it. I think he would have been able to
I
defend.
agree that it's a racing incident. I agree. I'm not saying he should have given the place back. I think it's a racing incident because, like you said, it's turn 1, lap 1. But I don't agree that Lando pushed him wide deliberately. I think he was leaving space for Oscar. But the other thing I was going to say is that we've heard Max before talking about Checo with many races saying, unless you are in mid-pack and you need to make up places off the start because you don't have the race pace to beat people on pace, lap 1 is actually not when you win races necessarily. You need to be patient. You need to remember that it's a long race, 70 laps around this track, and he risked it all in that corner. But that corner to me was a much more of a Checo move than a Max move. Like you said, he realised he wasn't going to have the apex immediately because both the McLarens got him, and in terms of their position on track there. And so he committed to that outside line, which he wasn't going to make because 3 don't go into a corner like that. So I just think he misjudged it slightly. But I also think it's a lap 1 incident because, like you said, that's where people are trying to make moves. So I don't think he should have had to give the place back, but he may not even had to. They might have been a penalty at the end anyway, so which may or may not have made a difference. That was an interesting one in terms of how they made that decision to me. It's only because they saw that it was being investigated or noted, and they're like, oh, let's just get ahead of this.
I would have taken the 5-second penalty.
Potentially. Well, you don't know what it's going to be. Yeah.
Even 10 seconds to anyway.
Let's move on. We have been talking about Red Bull for some time, and rightfully so, but let's have a quick chat about Aston Martin. Alonso qualified 7th, finished 11th. Stroll qualified 8th, finished 10th. Alonso didn't have much pace in the race, but he played an interesting game because he was very much playing the team game this weekend, even though you'll see that he finished behind Stroll, obviously, even though he qualified ahead of him. He was very strategic when it comes to bunching up the group. He helped Stroll extend his stint, and he very much was kind of playing that team game to try and get both of them up into the points. Did you have anything of note for these two this weekend?
Just I'm gutted for Fernando. The longer this saga goes on, the more depressing it gets. Just want to see the guy up the front in a car that's capable of competing with the likes of Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc and Sainz in and out every weekend because that's where the guy belongs. And unfortunately, his career hasn't panned out the way it should have. And I don't like seeing it. Good on him for playing the team game. I think strategically they got it right, but they're in the definition of no man's land, Aston Martin. They are not where they should be, and they are fast enough. They are fast enough to beat the rest. The rest, they're firmly in that 5th and 6th spot. So, depending on which way you look at it, 5th spot. Sorry.
Let's move on to Ferrari. So Sainz qualified 4th, finished 6th, and then the other way around. Leclerc qualified 6th, finished 4th. I don't have any notes for them this weekend, Campy. They were also having there were a couple of moves which involved them, but nothing too kind of dramatic when it came to Ferrari in comparison to what was going on with other teams.
Well, there's been times this season where Ferrari's clearly been the second best car on the grid. Times where they've been third. I think they're probably the 4th after this weekend. The only thing I'll say about Ferrari is after Carlos, after his win in Melbourne and the results that he got after that, out qualifying Leclerc 2 or 3 times in a row and beating him in race pace, and Leclerc was definitely on the back foot. I think the shine's gone off a bit of that now, and I think whilst Sainz beat him in qualifying this weekend, I think Leclerc's race pace over the last 3 or 4 races has probably reset the pecking order. I think he's clearly been fastest. Still very close, and Carlos can do things in that car that Leclerc can't, and vice versa. And I think it's down to track specifics. But if my head is choosing the number 1 and 2 driver, just based on results this year, I think Leclerc has just put himself in front. And I mean, Carlos didn't get a great start this weekend, ruined his race, but you would think in the position he's in, and particularly who was behind him, should have been able to latch on to Leclerc a bit more than what he did. And I think the shine's come off Carlos a bit since we were hyping him up, in race 3, 4, 5. I mean, he missed the second race too. So very interesting times at Ferrari, and interesting for Carlos and what he's going to do moving forward.
Yeah, he was toying with the media a little bit this weekend, saying, sorry, I've been too busy watching the Euros to think about my contract for next year, so I'll need to give that my focus again. And everyone was like, stop messing with us, tell us where you're going.
Very good.
Also, watching England lose is one of the funniest things ever. Ferrari do need to start becoming a more consistent player at this point. They've obviously been overtaken by McLaren in the constructors, and they are a team where the constructors is important to them, I think, partially because they're not in a position to even be thinking about contending for world championships. So that is something that they actually could potentially win, right? So I think that is important to them, but currently they just don't have the consistency to suggest that they're going to be able to take a really strong stand against McLaren or kind of continue that race, especially when you've got someone like Oscar, who's the only driver to have finished every single lap in the Grand Prix for this season so far, right? So if we're talking about consistency, that's probably the definition of it right there. So that team is certainly in an interesting position when it comes to where they are for the remainder of the season, which takes us to McLaren. Campy, many thoughts, many thoughts.
Mercedes?
Oh, you're right. We probably did miss Mercedes. In fact, we meant to talk about Mercedes before Ferrari.
Sorry, Mercedes. They're on a slight purple patch. They've been the last 3 races. They won 2 of them. George got it wrong in qualifying, and I understand that changing weather conditions, it happens. But 2 wins on the trot and a podium this week. They are low-key improving, and there seems to be some pace in that car. I think they'll be looking very much at the McLaren moving forward and seeing what they can do. But I've got no doubt that McLaren may be a pretty good car in the next 18 months to 2 years if they figure some stuff out. So kudos to them. I think low-key, very good.
Yeah, look, they were interesting this weekend. Russell, I think, actually did a pretty cracking job in the race. He had 34 laps on his first set of tyres, which is a pretty good stint in my books. He was the last person to take the first pit stop. Hamilton did very well not to run at the backside of Lando Norris on that turn 1 incident that we've just been talking about. That was actually, I think, underestimated. Didn't get as much focus, obviously, in comparison to what else was going on around him, but that was actually quite a skillful defensive driving there. I think the amusing thing, as we do talk about McLaren next, is that McLaren made all of these moves to try and avoid being undercut by Hamilton. But I know hindsight is a great thing, but he wouldn't have had the tyres for an undercut anyway.
No.
That was not necessarily something that I think was in reach for him. So we can talk about that in just a moment. But of course, we will acknowledge, even though he says that the numbers don't mean that much to him, I think it's pretty impressive. First driver in history to reach 200 career podiums, which is very, very impressive statistic there. Now, let's talk about McLaren, of which I have many, 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 many thoughts. More specifically about one driver and
take us away.
So I woke up on Sunday morning to many messages from you guys, which made me very anxious when it came to watching this race, knowing that I was watching a replay. Mostly when it came to some very concerned comments about this team and the calls that were upcoming as you guys were kind of entering the last 20 laps of this race. Very concerning indeed. Okay, let's get start into this. And I'm going to start, Campy, and then we can go from there.
You go.
There is a storyline this weekend which did not need to exist. This should have been Oscar Piastri wins his first Grand Prix, full stop, exclamation mark, fireworks, and no other conversations being had. Instead, thanks to initially McLaren as a team and subsequently Lando as an individual or a child, we might say, we are instead talking about two other storylines which did not need to be here. McLaren did not have control over this situation, and Lando then took that absence of control, grabbed it, and chose to ruin it for the team. When it comes to McLaren's call, Oscar had track position and should have been given preference when it comes to the order of the pit stops.
Twice.
They were not under risk from Hamilton at an undercut. I understand that that's perhaps something that's easier to say in hindsight. I'll go give them the benefit of the doubt then, because never underestimate Hamilton, let's be clear. But instead, they chose to pit Lando first. When they did that, they told Oscar that they would sort it out afterwards, aka don't worry. They did not tell Lando that that's what would be expected of him before they brought him in. So already you've got two drivers going into this strategic move, one with different information or some information over the other. When Lando did then learn that that's what was going to be expected of him, he chose to put his teammate in this weird, stressful position, made the team look really silly, and as a result also come out looking really petulant and putting this dark cloud over Oscar Piastri's exceptional control over this race that he had had until that point. My thing with Lando, based on the situation that he was in, quite honestly, if you're going to say, no, I'm not giving this position back, bloody do it then. Don't give it back. Stick to what you say you're going to do. Instead, you drew it out for laps and laps on end. And at that point, and this is where I said I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I can empathize with how much you do not want to give this position back. You're higher in the championship. You're a racing driver. You want to win. Of course, you should question in your head, do I have to give this team back? That tells me that you're a winner at heart, right? But he dragged it out for so long that tells me, do you know what? This actually isn't about that. You're trying to prove a point, which makes this less of a moment where your amygdala is taking over in your brain and you're being driven by that snap decision of kind of not fight or flight, but essentially that you've got more of an emotional reactionary kind of behavior that you're demonstrating. This was considered. He decided consciously to behave in this way, and he drew it out for laps on laps, ignoring his engineer to the point that they had to say, can we get a radio check? Then having to have them plead with him. He's trying to exert dominance over his engineer, his team, and his other teammate. And instead, what he did was came across like a petulant child. Now, they should never have been put in this position in the first place. However, once you are in it, you have a choice in how you behave. I'll give anybody the benefit of the doubt of a snap reaction because of the conditions under which they are racing and the fact that they are drivers at heart and how our brain works. I get it. That's not this. He drew it out for laps and he made a thought out decision as to how he would behave. And not only did he extend it during the race, it continued afterwards. It continued in the cool down room. It continued onto the podium. It wasn't until he made it out into the press conference afterwards where I think somebody probably told him to pull his head in and gave him a few lines about how it's great for the team and his thought processes, and that's when he started to turn the narrative around. It's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree with a lot. I just want to talk about Oscar. Mate, this kid is a genuine, bona fide, under the radar superstar of the here and now and a future world champion. He is that good. What he's been able to do in 35 races, I don't think we've seen a driver other than probably Max come on and drive the way that he is driven in a car at times that hasn't been great on track. We've only had, the last, 12 and 10 races last year. So 20 races of those, 25 races of those were the cars genuinely competitive that he's done these things. Stoked with his qualifying. 22 1,000ths of a second. That is nothing. That is hairline levels, and it's been like that for the last 3 races too. If you think about the penalty, his qualifying lap in the Hungarian where he got that bullshit off-track penalty, track limits, I was stoked to see him get the start and go up the inside. That was a bold move, and the way that he controlled the race till that point, he really did everything right. Other than that mistake, which cost him, 3 seconds. Look, they're going to make mistakes. I can handle that, but cool, calm, collected. My frustration with McLaren is, and I'm biased. I went through this with Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel. We are now seeing it at McLaren with Oscar Piastri and his treatment by McLaren. And it is frustrating to watch. There's lots of bias here, and I don't give a shit about it. I'll call it on myself. If you say, he's got too biased, and look, Oscar has treated this team with the utmost respect and professionalism in everything that he's done. When he's been asked to move over, he's been asked to make a decision to the detriment of his own race for the betterment of the team. He does it every time. And there's been reasons for that, and he's highly critical of himself. This was the race that he didn't need to do that. He didn't need the team to do A, B, C, and D and put him in that position. Which was, anyway, that's a decision for McLaren. They just saw that. I don't think they need to do it at the first pit stop, but it's more understandable. The second pit stop, they didn't need to worry about Hamilton or Verstappen or anyone behind them. They were clearly faster. Now, he got a 4.5 second, 5 second lead on on Norris before he went off and lost a few seconds. It was back down to 1, and then he got it back out to 2.5. By the time that Lando pitted and came back out, and he was 3.5 seconds in front, that's 6 seconds lost on a pit stop. There's no way that Norris was ever going to pick up that. And if you take into the time that he lost on the first pit stop too, look, there's no way that Norris was ever going to do it. I think he showed great composure, great race pace. So I'm stoked for him. There is a question mark over this race win for me, and that's what I don't want to see. Yeah. Because when Mark Webber got his first race, no one could say anything, he got lucky, this happened. He dominated that race, even had a drive-through penalty, which cost him 18 or 19 seconds in the race, and still won it by 13. There was nothing anybody could take away from it. This one's still got a question mark over it. Now, Oscar's got plenty of a future in this sport, and he will win races, and it'll be a blip on the radar when we get to it. But right here in the now, it is, for me, there's still question marks over it. The other thing I'll say about Lando, as much as I've criticised him and I don't really like him, there's a part of me that you pussy for giving that place back. We've seen drivers of yesteryear, seen your Vettels, your Schumachers, these guys, Hamilton's made these decisions too. I mean, Schumacher was the worst of them. He took people out so he could win world championships. We view them in history. You get through the BS of the coming weeks, and within a month, nobody's talking about it. Everyone knows where you're at. I'm not sure. Is Lando too much of a nice guy? And I'm being devil's advocate here. Will he win a drivers' championship? No. I don't think he's made of the right stuff. Well, that's just my personal opinion.
But that's my point. I was like, if you don't want to give the place back, don't do it. Don't. No. Instead, you've just come across as this whingy kind of it's bizarre behavior and it's very obvious that you're just being passive aggressive, which you've continued on. So all you've done is expose a character flaw, which we all have, but you've put it on display. If you don't want to give the place back and you're going to make a big deal out of it, well, then stand your ground and don't give it back.
Yeah. And I would hope that if Oscar was in the same position ever, that he just wouldn't do it. He'd be like, no. And you got to insert some dominance in the team. People are attracted to that level of not taking the knee and doing it. Walk in, say, I'm the number one driver in this team. I'm the guy that's going to win the world championship. And if you don't get behind me to do this, then you're getting out. I'm on this trajectory to here. And the reality, anyway, we can move on. But, geez, did he do the right thing, though? As an Aussie fan and bias and put up with this shit in F1 for a long time? Absolutely. And would have I raged about it if he didn't do the right thing in the team thing? Absolutely. I raged about it. Absolutely. But there's a hint in me that says, hey, you made the right stuff, mate. And I'm not sure he does. Every champion has been in a position where they've had to make decisions in order to do stuff. And I'm sure it's competitive as hell in the garage, which is stuff we don't see. So kudos
I think
to
it was
McLaren.
actually David Coulthard said that he's been in this position before and he did eventually give the place back and he regrets it to this day. He was like, I still think about it and I wish I hadn't done it. And maybe this is the lesson that Lando's learned, going, if I want to be taken seriously, I need to, maybe he'll learn from this. I don't have enough evidence from his previous behaviour to suggest that that's going to be his future behaviour, to be honest. But, benefit of the doubt, maybe he'll take this and through conversations with the team, they'll say, next time you ask me to do this, I won't be doing it. So who knows if that is going to be a change that we see in the future. But as you said, I think there's definitely an argument to be made that based on my current standings in Drivers' Championship and my current gap to Oscar,
Max,
I should just be able to take this and go with it. But the thing for me is the information that Oscar had going into that pit stop is that they had already said to him, this is what's going to happen. And so that is why I'm not happy with how Lando behaved afterwards and, the situation they were both in. The other thing is that you probably have Oscar driving to a delta because he's been told that Lando is going to slow down, while you've got Lando pushing on tyres that weren't meant to be pushing as well at that point, by the way. So it's not just the fact that gap was opening. You've also got the reason why it's opening, which is the way in which Oscar's been told to drive and the way that Lando is choosing to drive. So it's just not as black and white as he can't catch up as well. So it was a terrible situation for both of them to have been in. And at the end of the day, I think that hat sits on McLaren.
Yeah, you're totally right. You're 100,000% right. So where do we go from here? Like, where do you go from here, Freya? What happened? Like, I just think McLaren failed in their duty to the drivers. They should never expose drivers and these kids because, they're men, but they're not. Like, they're not, What happens next weekend? Piastri will be, Anyway, we'll move on. And Lando might say something this week during, I regret it and I should have done it, blah, blah, blah. But so what happens when Piastri hears that and he thinks about that if he's in that reverse position? Lando said he regretted it, so I just said, stuff it, I'll go this way. Anyway, look. The future's bright in this sport. Jeez, it's exciting. It's going to be good.
It's going to be good. That is absolutely true. Shall we say our driver of the day on 3? 1, 2, 3. Oscar.
Oscar! No shoey. I thought we'd get a shoey on the podium, but
No, not
new-
that
the
wouldn't have
new
been
ice
right.
game.
Not under those conditions for one. Like
Yeah.
I think if he under those conditions, I don't think that would have been the way to celebrate. The other thing is that they did actually ask him that in the press conference afterwards. They said no shoey, and he goes, "Look, that's Danny's legacy. I'll make my own." I was like, I like that. And he also said, I'm not a super emotional guy when it comes to you're not going to get that out of me.
Love that. Love that.
I'm going to celebrate in my own way. And I was like, that is understanding of self, and I absolutely love it. I love it. So safe to say, driver of the day for all three of us goes to Oscar. Let's take a look at our fantasy team competition. I'm not going to lie, I haven't had time to go through and find some names, so we'll try and make up for that next weekend. But let's have a look at rankings after the Hungarian Grand Prix. In first place, we have Rock and Stroll. Second place, we have Hasta la Vista, baby. Suzanne Keogh, well done. I love that name every time. And in third position, we have Bronny Team 2 with Bronwyn and Collier, so well done there. Quickly going to find where we are. This is going on the fly, so let's see. I'm in 78th position. Let's see where Campy is. Campy is in 82nd position. There you go. And James is in 40th. So we've got some work to do between both of us, Campy. I mean, I haven't looked at my team for a little while, but we'll see how that goes. When we'll look at some team names next weekend. We are, speaking of next weekend, off to Spa. Campy, this is one of your favourite tracks when it comes to the scenes that we get here. How excited are you?
Very, very excited. I think this is probably the last time we will see Eau Rouge and Ration in its current current format. I think it will get changed. I just think there's too many incidents that's happening on that corner moving forward for them to not make the necessary changes, which is a shame. But, it'll be like the Halo. We'll think it sucks, and then you get into it, and it's not really a big deal. So, very excited. It's good. And can I just say, I love talking about Formula One, Fro. This has been the best podcast. I've loved it. I've been at home by myself since, Sunday night. No one to talk to except Bonnie and the cat. And stuck in front of a computer, but I just love doing this podcast. Jeez, it's fun. It's good. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy us listening and ranting.
I love it too, Campy. And do you know what I would love to see? I would love to see where other people are listening to this podcast. We know that we've got people listening to Lakeside Drive who are on the train. Don't tell us if you're don't show us if you're driving while you're listening. We don't encourage that. We know that there's people who are out driving garbage trucks in the morning doing amazing work. We know that there's people who are out on tractors. We've got rural listeners. Show us where you're listening. Take a photo, put it on Instagram, tag Lakeside Drive. We want to see where you're listening from, because maybe you're stuck on your couch with your dog and you're looking to see where else in the world everybody else is thinking about Oscar Piastri as much as you are.
Very good, very good.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up here. Campy, that was a great discussion. It's been needing to be had for some time here. Thanks for your patience, listener. We've both got a lot going on at the moment, so this is when we were able to come together, which was worth the wait, I hope. But until next time, Campy, thanks so much for your company and for your debate. Listener, thank you for coming on this ride with us. It's been an emotional one, and no doubt next week will as well. So we look forward to being in your ears again when we go to the Belgian Grand Prix.